All right, I think we're ready to go. Uma is ready and excited to start here, so I'll let her take it from here. She'll do the first part of the presentation.
Good morning and welcome to the ArcGIS Pro SDK for .NET, the mapping and layout session. I'm Uma Harano and next to me here is Wolf Kaiser. We both work in the SDK team. So let's get started. Here is our session overview for today. I'm going to start with the map tool. I'm going to talk about 4 applications for the map tool. We're going to select features. We're going to create an embeddable control, a map view overlay control, and then a custom pop-up. And then Wolf is going to take it over and present the new layout API. He's going to use the layout class to create a page layout, and then he's going to use layout elements to provide content to the layout. The map tool is a base class, it's an abstract base class, and it represents a tool used to perform interactive operations with a map view. You can use a map tool to select features, identify features, and to create custom construction and editing tools. It provides virtual methods for keyboard and mouse events, and it also has a collection of properties that you can use to configure the default tool behavior. It has callbacks for sketch complete and sketch cancelled operations. Here in this slide, you can see a custom map tool. It's called the My Basic Sketch tool. It derives from the map tool base class, as you can see in the snippet. This snippet is tubbed out by the Pro SDK map tool item template. Here in the constructor of the tool, you can see 3 properties that are already preset for you. So let's go over each of these. The first is the isSketchTool property. It is set to true. The isSketchTool property determines the default mouse click behavior of the tool. In this case, it is to create a sketch. The sketch type property determines the shape of your sketch. In this case, it is set to a rectangle, but there are many other options like an ellipse or a circle, etc. The sketch output mode determines the geometry of the sketch, whether it's set to map or screen coordinates. So if you're working with 3D data, geometries in screen coordinates are supported, and if you're working with 2D, then map and screen coordinates are supported. At the bottom over here, you see the sketch complete callback. It takes in the geometry of the sketch as a parameter. Here in the next slide, you can see the sort of operations you can do inside the onSketchComplete callback. In this particular example, I am calling the ActiveMapViews select features method, and I'm passing in the geometry. This is the geometry of the sketch drawn by our tool, and I get a collection of features that intersect the sketch geometry. The select feature method, it runs on the main sim thread, so it has to run within the context of your queued task lambda. That's what you see over here. So now, then I call the map views zoom to async method to zoom to my collection. We will see more of this in the demo, which is right here. I'm going to use the Pro SDK map tool template to create a simple map tool that selects features and displays a message box with the selection information. So here I have a Visual Studio add-in project. It's a blank project. I've added no UI customization to this. And I'm going to right-click on the project node and access the SDK item templates. Add new item. I'm going to select the ArcGIS Pro add-ins folder. And within this collection of UI elements, I'm going to select my map tool item template. I'm going to call this my simple map tool. So now Visual Studio stubs out my custom map tool. Here is my simple map tool class. It derives from the map tool base class. And here is the constructor. These are the same properties that you saw in the slide. This is going to, the tool is going to create a sketch. I'm creating a rectangle. And I'm going to work with 3D geometry, so I'm going to change the sketch output mode to screen. Now within the onSketch complete callback, I want to select all the features that intersect my geometry. And then I want to display a simple message box with the selection information. So here in my cheat sheet, I have a couple of lines of code, and I'm going to put that into this callback. So now let us see what I'm doing here. I'm calling the select features method of my active map view. I'm passing in the geometry that is passed to my callback over here, and I'm getting a collection of selected features that intersect my geometry. And I'm wrapping this in the context of my queued task, lambda expression, and finally over here I'm displaying a simple message box with the selection information. So I'm going to add a couple of breakpoints here, and then let's run this tool in Pro. Okay, I'm going to start the Visual Studio Debugger, which will launch ArcGIS Pro. I'm going to pick my Map Tools project over here. It's going to open a local scene with a townhouse file GDB dataset. So over here in my Add-in tab, you see my simple map tool. When I click this tool, I activate it. So here is the breakpoint in the constructor. I'm going to step over this. These are all the initialization properties that we went over. And then when I click continue, notice that my cursor has changed. It's in selection mode right now. And I'm going to select a couple of features in this data set. So here is the breakpoint in my callback. And the first thing I'm doing is I'm getting the collection of features that intersect my selection geometry, which was that rectangle that I etched on the view. Now I'm going to step over this. And here you can see that I'm displaying a message box. And you can see the message box in ArcGIS Pro. So it's a very simple message box. It just gives you some information about the selection. Okay, I'm going to stop the debugger and let's go back to our slides. Okay, now this is the embeddable control. So here in the lower right corner, you can see the embeddable control. It displays the X and Y coordinates on my top left corner of the map view, right here with the green arrow. So this embeddable control gets displayed when you activate your map tool. So this is the map tool over here, the show coordinates. You activate the tool, it displays this control. And when you deactivate the tool, the embeddable control is removed. So there's a Pro SDK item template that you can use to create this embeddable control. So the first step to working with an embeddable control is you define this control in your DAML. So here is the DAML declaration in the snippet on this slide. This is stubbed out for you by the SDK, but let's go over what this really does. You define the embeddable control within this categories element. It belongs to the Esri embeddable controls category. Here is the insert component child element. It has an ID attribute which is set to the DAML ID of our embeddable control. So this is important. This is our DAML ID of our control. And then the class name attribute is set to the view model, and the content child element's class name is set to the view. So this implements the model view model pattern. So the first step was we defined the embeddable control in DAML. Now we're going to link our embeddable control to our map tool. So I do that by setting the overlay control ID property of the map tool to the DAML ID of the embeddable control, the one that I just showed you in the previous slide. So then here there are a couple of other optional properties. The overlay control position ratio, you can use that to position your control on the map view. and the overlay control can resize. That allows you to configure if you want to resize your control or not. And here's a code snippet for that. And the third and the final step kind of ties it all together. So now how do you access your members in your Embeddable Controls view model? You do that by casting the overlay control property to the type of your view model. Now you will be able to access all your view model members, and here on the slide you can see the code snippet for that. And we'll also see this in the demo coming up. So I'm going to show you how you can select features with your map tool, and this will be displayed, the selection information gets displayed as an embeddable control on your map view. So here is my map tool embeddable control project in Visual Studio. It has the exact same simple map tool that we just worked with in the previous demo. I have used the SDK item template to create my embeddable control, and the template has stubbed out my view over here. You can see that it's very simple. I've just added a little text block to display some selection information, and the view model that has the public properties, which are data bindings to those UI elements. Here in the config.damo, this is where I'm defining my embeddable control. Again, this is stubbed out by the SDK. Here is the insert component element. Its ID defines the DAML ID of an embeddable control. Here is my view model set to the class name attribute and my view over here. Okay, so now when you look in the tool, this is the exact same tool with the little modifications. Here are all the property initialization. Now I need to link this tool to my embeddable control. So I set the overlay control ID property to the DAML ID, the one that I just showed you. And I want my control to show up on the top left. So I position it using the overlay control position ratio property. And I want it to be resizable. So I set the overlay control can resize to be true. So I have linked my embeddable control to the tool. And the last step, here in the on-sketch complete callback, I get all my selected features that intersect my sketch geometry. But now, instead of a message box, I'm going to display it in my embeddable control. So I do that by accessing my embeddable controls view model. I do that just like you saw in the slide. You have the overlay embeddable control property that's cast to my view model. So now that I have a handle to my view model, I can access its public members and set the selection information. So let's go ahead and set a couple of breakpoints here and see how it looks in Pro. I'm going to start the debugger. I'm going to open the same project, the local scene with the townhouse file GDB dataset. Now here on the add-in tab, I have my new tool, which is my map tool embeddable control. So when I click this tool, I'm going to activate it. Here is the breakpoint in the constructor. This is where I'm linking the embeddable control to my tool activation. So I'm going to step over this. I am positioning my embeddable control and setting the resizable property. So I'm going to click continue, and you can see that the embeddable control is now displayed on my map view on the top left corner. So now I'm again in my tool selection mode. The cursor has changed and I'm going to select a couple of features. So the on-sketch complete callback breakpoint is now hit. Now in this highlighted line of code, I am accessing my view model. And I am setting the properties to some of the selection information so that you can see it on the view. And here it is. The embeddable control has been updated with some selection information. Okay, so moving on to the slides. Here is the map view overlay control. This is a new pattern that was introduced in 2.1. So the map view overlay control is very similar to the embeddable control, but the display of the map view control is not dependent upon the map tool activation. you display a map view overlay control with code. You can see the code over here in this slide at the bottom. So the first thing you do is you create your map view overlay control by using its constructor. You pass in the user control as a parameter, and then the map view has the add overlay control method, and you use this method to display the overlay control, and the remove overlay control method will obviously remove the control from your map view. So here is a demo that I'm going to show you a map view overlay control. So let's start with our same project, the same one that I used for creating the embeddable control. So here I displayed the control on the map view by activating the tool. I'm not going to do that anymore. Instead, I'm going to display a map view overlay control whenever I select features on the map. So let's see how I did that. Here in the module class file, I'm listening to the map selection changed event. So I'm going to uncomment this line. So whenever the map selection changes, I have a event handler here on map selection changed event. So within this event, the first thing I'm doing is I'm getting a handle to my embeddable controls view and view model. So the embeddable control class over here has a create method, and I pass in the DAML ID of my embeddable control, the same thing that I showed you in the config.daml. Just to refresh your knowledge, right here is the DAML definition of our embeddable control, and this is our DAML ID. So I'm passing that to the create method. So this returns a tuple, and the tuple holds our view and the view model. So now that I have the view and the view model, I'm calling the map view overlay controls constructor, and I'm passing the user control, which is stored in the tuple. So then here I'm calling the map views add overlay control to add the overlay to the map. Here I'm getting all the selected features in my map. And since I already have a handle to the view model, I'm just displaying the information, just like we did before. So let's enable these breakpoints and run this sample to see it in ArcGIS Pro. I'm going to open the same project. So now I'm going to choose the ArcGIS Pro's core map tool. Here is a selection tool. So I'm just going to use that tool, and I'm going to select some features in my data set. And you can see that my breakpoint inside the on map selection changed event handler is hit. Here I'm getting a handle to my view and the view model. I'm creating my map view overlay control over here. I'm adding it to the map view. I'm getting the selected features. And next, I'm accessing the view model to set some information. So here is my map view overlay control. That's been, it's displayed by selection changes that happen in the map. So moving on to custom pop-ups.
So the only difference between those two is what's initiating.
Exactly, how you display it. It's the map view overlay control is a little more flexible. You can display it without binding it to the map tool activation. Like you can listen to events or whatever your workflow is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. So custom pop-ups. Map views have an ability to display some information about their layers by using custom pop-ups. A custom pop-up displays information by using HTML5 and JavaScript, and it is implemented in code. Here in this slide, you can see the method. It's the show custom pop-up method on the map view class, and there are a couple of overloads for that. So the custom pop-up method on the active map view, it takes a collection of pop-up content As you can see in this slide, you can define your own custom pop-up content. You have to set the map member variable to a layer in your map view and the ID to a collection of the features that you select in the layer. And you set your HTML content to be a custom content. You use HTML5 and JavaScript. So I'm going to show you a sample that shows you some custom pop-up information. So here is a sample. So the first thing I want to show you here is the template HTML. This is the HTML that will be displayed in the custom pop-up in our sample. It's very simple. There is a table and a chart. This table and the chart will be updated dynamically with information from the map view. So here is my map tool. Nothing new in the constructor. It's the exact same pattern that we've worked before. And here in the onSketch complete callback, so the first thing I'm doing is I'm getting all the features selected in the map. Here is my collection of selected features. And then over here, we are iterating through this collection of features to create our collection of pop-up content. So I'm going to create my own custom pop-up content. So I'm using this dynamic pop-up content class. I'm passing in the feature layer and the OID of the selected features. So then this collection of pop-up content is passed to the active map views show custom pop-up method right here. So let's run through this. I'm going to enable the breakpoints, start the debugger to launch Pro. So I'm going to use the election project over here. So I have a feature layer here, US states, that has some election result information for every state. So here on the Add in tab, I'm going to activate my custom pop-up map tool. So now I'm going to select a couple of states. I'm going to select California and Nevada. And here is my breakpoint. Here, this is where I'm collecting my selected features. And then I'm iterating through the features to create my custom pop-up content. And as you can see in the pop-up list, there are 2 selected features. You can see the count is 2. And then I'm going to display the custom pop-up. So you can see that in the map over here. You can see the rich HTML content, and you can see that the title bar says it's first displaying the information for the state of Nevada. Here is my table with some election information and the chart representation of that. Here at the bottom, you can see that I'm visualizing the first selected feature, 1 of 2, and then I click this next feature button. And now the pop-up dynamically updates. It's displaying the information for California. You can see that on the title bar. The table and the chart have been updated. So this is a custom pop-up. So that concludes the mapping section of this session. Now over to Wolf to talk about the layout API.
Thanks, Uma. So next, I want to talk about creating layouts using the ArcGIS Pro API. This is a feature that is new, introduced in the API in 2.1. That's why we're going to talk a little bit about it. If you don't know what a layout is, a page layout, also known as layout, is a collection of one or more map elements organized on a virtual page designed for map printing. Layouts also include all supporting elements such as a title, a legend, and any kind of descriptive text. You can see an example taken from our documentation on the right side. That would be a layout. And so let's dive into this a little bit. The API provides the layout class. The layout class represents a page layout in a project. So you can see on the right side, that is a page layout. So it's created by using the layout factory instance.create layout class or method of the layout factory class. The layout class also provides access to basic layout properties such as the page information, the page dimensions, size and unit. Also access to all layout through layout element management. So you can add, delete elements like text and maps. And then finally, the layout class provides the export methods that you can use to export your final layout. So to the layout class creation, here's the pattern to create a new layout. The parameters you need for that is the page size, the page unit, and the layout name. And if you've seen the earlier sessions, you have to run this within the QTask class environment, which provides you access to the ArcGIS Pro background scheduler. So this, everything in the context of the QTask.run method will run as a background task. And you will see later it takes quite a while to create a layout. So within this background task, I specify the layout.instance.create layout method, and I provide 3 parameters, which is the width, the height, and then the unit that I use, in this case, it is inches. Finally, I use the setName function to give the layout a name. And then I return the resulting layout to the caller. So to layout elements, a page layout contains layout elements. You can see on the right side, again, the sample of that. It's created by, layout elements are created by using the layout element factory class. And there's some examples of layout elements. One is the map frame. You can see the map frame right here. We have a legend that shows you the symbology used in your map frame. That's right here. We have a north arrow. We have picture elements. There's no picture element on this. You have a scale bar. That's right here, linked to the map frame. We have text elements, so this would be a text element. And then we have the table frame, and that's maybe something specifically new in ArcGIS Pro, where you can actually create a table frame that is able to access your features that are displayed within your map frame in table form. And we're going to see that in a demo, in an upcoming demo, how that works. So how do I create layout elements? I have to use the layout element factory class to create any element. And here's a sample of how I create a map frame. The layout factory.instance.create map frame method is used for that. And again, I have to run this within the context of a QTask. So again, this is running on a scheduled background task within ArcGIS Pro. So let's take a look at this code real quick. First, I have to determine the position. Where on my layout do I want to put my map frame? I do that by creating an envelope. I use the envelope builder for that and specify the coordinates. I'm going to explain shortly how these coordinates work, but I have to give it the bottom left corner of my map frame and then the top right corner of my map frame. Then I have to, in order to create a map frame, I have to tell it which map to use. Remember, you can create many map frames in your layout, not just one. In my example, I just have one map frame, but potentially you could have multiple map frames with overview maps or 3D views or whatever your preference is. So I have to get a handle to the actual map that I want to display in my map frame, and then I call the create map frame method, passing in the layout in which I want to create it. I pass in the envelope for the position of the map frame, and then the handle to the actual map. So the resulting element is a map frame element that then is added to the collection of my elements in my layout. So here, a quick note to the coordinate system that is being used in a layout. The origin of your coordinate system is on the bottom left of the page. So a 0, 0 would be the bottom left of your page. So anything you place at 0, 0 will appear there. Now, as you can see on this example here, I create an envelope that goes over 4 inches to the right, then 4 and 5 inches to the up. So that would be my bottom left corner of my map frame. And then the top right corner would be the next coordinate, which would be 8 inches over and 10.5 inches up. Then I add the map frame to my layout, and you can see the result over here. I just took this little sample and pasted it into a little on-click method, and this is what it gave me. So to the layout element creation, it's very simple. If you look at the layout name, like map frame, legend, north arrow, picture element, there is a corresponding create method within the layout element instance factory. You can see a few samples on the right. So if you create a north arrow, that would just be your regular north arrow. Now the north arrow needs to be displayed in the context of a map frame. It needs to be linked to a map frame, because without having a map, a north arrow doesn't make much sense. And the same applies to the scale bar. It also needs to be linked to a map frame. And the same applies to a table element, which also needs to be linked to a feature class and then to a map frame to know what contents it has to display. So this leads me to my first demo. We're going to create a layout with code. And then in my next demo, we make it a little bit more complicated and we create a map series. So what I did is I created a very simple application with a doc pane. I used our item templates to do so. And then on my doc pane, I added a drop-down. And the drop-down allows me to select different paper sizes. So, I want to have small paper sizes and large paper sizes. I can select these from my drop-down. And then I have a button here, the Create Layout button. And the list box we address a little later. That's not relevant in this specific demo. So if I click on this button here, you can see the XAML that is behind this specific button on the UI. And we use data binding for that. If you were in our earlier sessions, you know a little bit about data binding in MVVM. And we bind this to a I command that's in my view model code behind that actually is initiated when I click on the Create Layout button. So let's take a look at that. So here's my I command to create the actual layout. And again, as I showed you before, all of this functionality has to run on a scheduled background task. And you will see why, because these functions actually take quite a while, and you don't want the user interface to be not responsive during that time. That's why we use the Pro Task Scheduler to execute these methods. So let's go ahead and run this. I set a breakpoint here, and then we can take a look at some of the parameters. So I run the debugger. ArcGIS Pro opens. I open my, and by the way, this sample is available in our community samples, and also the data set that we're using for our samples is also available for download. So this is my add-in. It's already displayed here. This is usually the button that I can use to to show my add-in, my doc pane if it's not being displayed. And again, here's the drop-down by which I can select the paper size. These are European formats, you know, for A2, the European norm paper formats. A2, I think, is the largest format. So if I click on the paper size, and now I have the proper paper size selected, I can now click on my Create Layout. We hit our breakpoint. And now you can see that the drop-down determines the paper size. So in this case, I actually submit the width of the paper, which is 59.4. The height is 42. And the linear units, because it's a European format, it's in centimeters. So I pass this into the layout factory to create my layout right here. And then I also set the name of the layout, which happens to be Railroad Map Series. I'm gonna step through this a little bit. Down here you see the code to create the map frame. Now clearly I don't have hard-coded values in here because my dimension values are driven by that drop-down you saw earlier that has the different page sizes for me. And clearly my layout positions change depending on the page size. So this is where I create the envelope for my map frame. And I'm gonna set a breakpoint right here. I'll step to where it creates the map frame. Now, as I told you earlier, the map frame, I need to retrieve the map that I want to display within my map frame. So here is the map, I have retrieved it. And now I create a map frame element within my layout by passing in the layout, the envelope where within to place my map, and then the actual map itself that determines, you know, which layers I want to display and what symbology I want to use. So I step over this, and the next element I want to create is a scale bar. And as you can see in the create scale bar code, I give it just the coordinates. I want you to place the scale bar at these specific coordinates, but it also needs to have a handle to the map frame element that it needs to have in order to display the proper scale. So the scale that this scale bar shows is meant to be for this map frame element. And I actually place it on top of the map frame element. And then the same, we have very similar code. You can see this is actually very easy to do. We create a north arrow down here. And again, the north arrow has a position, a starting position. And then the north arrow again has to be linked to a map frame element in order to know what orientation north is at. Now here's something, I'm going to display some text. This is going to be my title. Now in ArcGIS Pro we have something that's called the dynamic text, and you can read about dynamic text in the ArcGIS Pro online documentation because it's something that you can use from within ArcGIS Online. So I could have used dynamic text here that changes, and we'll do that in the next demo. But for the time being, I just hard-coded my title for my layout and say this is my railroad layout. And now here finally we're going to display two tables. I have one table where I want to display a layer that's called inspection locations. And for this layer in my table, I want to display 3 columns. So here's the display fields that I want to display. So I want to display the number field, the type field, and the description field. And if you want to know a little bit more how the internals work of that, there's a few lines of code associated with that. You can look at our example. And what you do is you just look at the add table to layout method, and you can see all the little few line statements that it needs to add that table. I also select the second feature class to display, which is the service locations. Now, both of these tables are linked to a map frame element. And the reason for this is when I display a table, the elements that are displayed, the records that are displayed in my table are only the features that are actually displayed on my map frame. Anything outside my map frame is not being displayed. So that way, the table that you see matches exactly the contents of your map frame. And then here we add a legend finally that shows us what the meaning of the symbology on the map. So let's run this. So you can see it's created my layout. It called it the name that I gave it, the Railroad Map Series. And here you can see it created this map. The map doesn't really have the right extent right now, but we'll fix that in the next demo. And if I go to this layout, you can see that if you look at some of these elements, for example, this is one of the table elements, and you can see I specify this is the inspection locations table. My number field, my type, and my description is being displayed. So this would just be, you know, any kind of field you want to display here is going to come up in this table. And the system automatically kind of sized my table so it displays all the elements. In this case, I have every single inspection location here. If I look at my map, you can see that my inspection locations and my service locations from both tables are all listed here. So right now, it's not really that great of a layout, but in the next demo, you'll see that much clearer. So this was the first demo. You are now able to create a layout from using the API, using code from within the API. And the next thing we want to do is we want to create a layout using a spatial map series. So first of all, some people might not be familiar with the spatial map series. This is a collection of map pages that are built from a single layout that represent a geographic area. In the future, ArcGIS Pro will also provide a timed map series that will go through your map series by time. But right now, we only support a spatial map series. So you can see on the flowchart on the bottom, we need a layout for this. We need some data. And what we need is a polygon index layer that we can use to then produce our map pages for each one of the records in the polygon index layer. So a common application for this is used in the utility industry. If you create service or inspection maps that are handed out to your service personnel that then go in the field and perform inspections, they all do it based on map pages, you know, by a predefined grid. So you see this grid on the right side. So when I produce my map pages, I would get a map for each single cell in this grid, and then I could hand those out to my service operators. So in our next demo, I have a collection of service area map pages, but they're built again from a single layout, and they follow the course of some railroad tracks. I've used a geoprocessing tool to provide the polygons along my railroad tracks. You can see that on the map on the left side. So I have polygons from 1 through 11. And the reason I did this is because I want to print the maps so using an angle that the polygon has, so I can always see the map that's being produced in a regular portrait format and not slanted in some kind of a direction. So you can see, once I produce my map series, for each one of these polygons, I don't have a grid anymore, I just follow the railroad tracks, I get a map on the right side from 1 through 11, so I get 11 maps. You know what? I would have written that down. You know, see me at the island and I'll try to recall. So the question was which tool I used to create this, and I can't remember. It was quite a while ago. So the resulting data set from that is available in, the resulting data set is available in our demos. I just used the data set. So when I first created the data set, that was quite a while ago, probably like a year ago or so. But come by the island, we hunt down the geoprocessing tool that can do this. It's pretty handy. So layout class and the sim layout class. So there's a little nugget here. The layout class contains a sim layout. The sim, as you might know from previous presentations, is the cartographic information model. It's kind of the internal works of ArcGIS Pro. And the layout exposes the most commonly used aspects of a layout page in form of properties and methods. But all the remaining properties and methods are available through the sim layout. And that's actually true throughout ArcObjects. Whenever you see something, a class that has a prefix of sim, like with the renderers or with the layers, then you know immediately those are the features that are a little bit deeper, you know, not very commonly changed within ArcGIS Pro. So then you go to the sim layout class instead of the layout class. So to access the sim layout, for the deeper functionality in the layout, you use the layout get definition call that will return the sim layout to you. And then you use the layout set definition call with the changed sim layout as a parameter to update the sim layout in your layout. And why do I need the sim layout? Because the sim spatial map series class is a property within the sim layout. It's not accessible directly through the layout class. So if I want to program my spatial map series, I need to go to that level. Now, how do I define my spatial map series? It's easy. You create a new spatial map series instance, and you have the following minimal settings for that. You need to specify the index layer URI. So earlier you saw the list of polygons that determined my maps in the series. So this would be the sim path to that specific layer. And you see the example right here. This is directly from my next sample. Then you need to give it a sort field. Now, the sort field has, it's the sequence and the sort field and determines a unique identifier which in each record of your index layer, in my case, my railroad maps, my polygons, each have a unique identifier for each page in my series. And then the current page ID that allows you to set the current page of the map series that is displayed within the layout view. And it's the same IDs that are specified by your sort field that we just specified up here. It will make a little bit more sense when we see the demo. And then the rotation field, that's kind of optional, but if I want to rotate the maps in my map series, I can link it to a rotation field. If I have the angle in there, then the map will be automatically rotated to that angle. So here's the snippet to enable my map series. And here I create the instance of a sim spatial map series. I give it a few parameters. And again, so here's the index layout URI. This is my polygon layer or my grid layer that specifies where all my map polygons are for my series. Then this is the sort field, so this has to be a unique ID for each one of my polygons. And here I have the angle field, which determines the name of the field where I store my angle. And again, each polygon has to have one. And then, or you know, if I want to specify that, if I don't specify it, the angle will be 0, right? And then the current page, I want to display page number 1. And below the snippet, you can see I get the definition. I assign my map series to the map series property in the sim layout. And then I set the definition of the sim layout back in my layout. So that brings me to my last and final demo here. And it's actually, I'm going to use the same project I had before. And all I need to do is remember where I have to change my code. And I have a few to-dos. So the first thing I want to do is remember where we hard-coded the title to my railroad layout before. I now want to use the dynamic text. And for the dynamic text, I want to say, use the type page. Now this is all defined in ArcGIS Pro, so this has really nothing to do with the API. You can actually type that in directly as you see it here into ArcGIS Pro and will have the same effect. And ArcGIS Pro actually makes it easy on you because it allows you to produce this dynamic text from a drop-down with multiple selections. But anyways, so in this case, what I want to do is I want to show for each page the name property. Now, we haven't really seen a name property yet, but I'm going to show you in my next to-do where I program my map series, because in that piece of code, and that piece of code is right here, I need to uncomment this. Okay, and in this piece of code, we didn't see this before because this is optional, I can specify a name field. And the name field is again an attribute column in my polygon layer, in my index layer. In this case, I say, well, I want to use the service area name here. So that's a field that I produced earlier. So each one of my polygons has a name field into the service area name attribute column of my railroad maps table. And that's what I want to use and display as the title. So we'll see this in a second. I just have to uncomment this piece of code here. And what this does, it takes all my produced pages, the result of my map series, and for each one of the pages produced, it will fill in that list box that we seen here earlier on my UI. So I have map ID and map series name. It will fill in this list, so that allows me to select from my list a specific page in my map series. So let's run this in the debugger and we'll see, hopefully everything works. There we go, ArcGIS Pro. And it's really funny, it seems like a lot slower to start up than when I do it in the office. I'm not sure. Something with these networks here. So again, I select the paper size. This time I do a smaller paper size. I select A4 paper size. I create my layout. We hit my breakpoint again here. Let me undo this breakpoint. So here's the railroad map series. You can see the layout created. And now you see the title of my map. I can zoom into that a little bit closer. Navigate into this. You can see on the top here. So here's my service area name. So this is actually the service area field that I specified earlier. So this exists in my polygon layer that determines my different map polygons. And for each one, I filled in a service area name, and I can display this. But the dynamic text is very flexible. There's virtually anything you have in your database that you can display here. Just use this dynamic syntax to display dynamic text. And also here you can see we have the inspection locations. Now you see, whereas before we had 2 columns of inspection locations, now we only have 5 records. And the reason is when you look on the map frame itself, and you can see some of the inspection locations here, the little stars, You can see there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, and these are the 5 that are being displayed. Now, if I go to the next, let me go to frame number 8 here, you can see frame number 8 only has 3 inspection locations and 3 service locations. And the reason is because when I look at the map, I will only find 3. So ArcGIS Pro takes care of that. We were able to kind of program these relationships and the content through the API and perform our layout kind of dynamically. Needless to say, in ArcGIS Pro, you can also use a template to produce similar results, but there's advantages if you do this programmatically, because you can embed all kinds of custom coding in this that you cannot really do through a template. And let me show you some of this. For example, if I would want to produce this whole map series as PDF, I could do this programmatically. As I specified earlier, the layout class also provides export methods. And I think I set a breakpoint there, so let me click on this export button. So the current map that I selected for my map series is now being exported. I clicked on the button, which called the code behind for that button is export map series item. And what I do in this code is first I retrieve my layout item from my projects. Then I call a save dialog, and I don't think we want to do all this code, so let me set another breakpoint here. So here's my save dialog that comes up. That's again part of the API. So I can say, well, I want to save my my PDF output, and I want to call it test.pdf, and I'm going to save it. So now I use the save dialog to browse to my destination and name my output file name. Then I get the actual layout. I specify, use this PDF format class to specify some parameters for my PDF output. So one of them would be the name that I retrieved from my save dialog, which you can see here is test.pdf. And then also the resolution. There's many more parameters that I could specify, but these are the minimum parameters that I need. It calls this validate output path method. And if hopefully this is okay, yes. So my output path is valid. And then I just call the export function and give it my output format. And if I continue, I should be able to go to my folder, and I now have the test.pdf output. I can take a look at that, and you can see, so here's my output, should be pretty much the same. So this was for the first. I can produce it programmatically now for all my pages, and then, store it somewhere in a folder where my service technicians and my inspection people can go ahead and have access to their maps. So back to the slides. So that kind of concludes the session for today. If you work with layouts, then hopefully this was very useful to you. Again, as I said, our samples are available on the Community Samples website. If you have any questions, we got 2 minutes, and any kind of difficult questions, just see us at the island, and we sit down with you. If you have any kind of specific samples you want to have questions, we can help you with that. And thank you very much. All right.